Happy Mother's Day to all you mothers and all you other mothers. I got all kinds of other mothers. All kinds of them. Let's see here. We're going to continue on in Daniel chapter 2. And we talked about one of the two popular views that they believe on this set of scripture. And we're going to talk about the second one this week. We'll start out in Daniel chapter 2 and we'll read verses 41 through 43. And it says, "And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of the iron and part of the clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." So let's go to Revelation chapter 17. And we'll read verses 1 through 7. "And it said, And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters." And a lot of times when it talks about many waters in here, it's talking about the Gentile nations, okay? "With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away into spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." And we're going to stop right there, because as we get on into Daniel, we'll get more into this. So, we're talking about 10 horns or 10 kingdoms. A lot of times the horn is used in the Bible as a kingdom. Represents power. But let's go to Psalm 83. And we might get a little insight into these kingdoms. Psalm 83, verses 1 through 8. It says, "Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make thee a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. And they have taken crafty counsel against thy people." I don't know where the crafty counsel comes from, but we might find out later. "And consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Assur, which is Assyria." Now, they're going to be a key player later on too. "Also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, Selah." Holpen means help. So, we might have a little insight as to who these 10 kingdoms are, or 10 kings. Edom is currently the southern part of Jordan. They're descendants of Esau. The Ishmaelites are northwest Saudi Arabia. And that would be Ishmael that we read about. Isaac's older brother, half-brother. Then we have Moab, which is in central Jordan. And that came from the incestuous relationship between Lot and his older daughter. The Hagarenes are the Egyptians. Gebal is a land of the Edomites. Ammon is currently northern Jordan, and that was the relationship between Lot and his younger daughter with that offspring. Then we have Amalek, which is in the Sinai Peninsula, And he is a grandson of Esau. That's where these people came from. The Philistines, which is currently the Gaza Strip and the Hamas, y'all hear about fighting all the time. Ancient enemies of Israel. I mean, you go back to Genesis 26, somewhere in that neighborhood. Then you have Tyre, which is currently Lebanon, which is where Hezbollah is stationed, that we read about in the news. Then we have Assur, which is Assyria, and that's Syria and Iraq. And that goes way back too. Assyria captured the northern 10 tribes of Israel about 700 years before Christ. But now, this prophecy that we're in right now is showing Gentile history, okay? But all prophecy, I'm not going to say all, but most, centers around the Middle East. So if you look at all these places on the map, they're all around Israel. And they're occupying the lands that God gave them from the start in the book. You know, we like to think that we support Israel and all that stuff, but nobody's ever stood up and said, this belongs to Israel. Y'all need to get out. Nobody's ever done that, you know. And when we get deeper into this is just a taste of it, but this could be, I'm not saying it is, but it could be the 10 nations it talks about rising up against Israel in the end times. But as we get into Daniel chapter 7, it will get in more into the beast and the 10 toes or horns, and it's very plausible. But it doesn't deal with part of verse 43 very well. Verse 43 in Daniel, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. The cleave part I'll agree with, because they fought each other for years and years and years. They've always been at each other's throats unless they unite against a common enemy. I'll agree with that. But to mingle themselves with the seed of men does not deal, it don't deal with that. You know, because that really gets into the supernatural. And you know, sometimes we have a hard time dealing with the supernatural. You know, we come here, a lot of us, every Sunday night, Wednesday. I'm sure throughout the week we read this book, pray. Well, we're dealing with supernatural here, but it doesn't register. You know, sometimes we come to church just going through the motions. It's not to have a meeting with a supernatural God. And I think sometimes that we fail in that supernatural, except in hindsight. Now we can look back through our life and see where things have happened that we can't explain. Or in hindsight, we do pretty good with it. In the moment, I think that a lot of us fail. Some people are a little more tuned in than others. I'll put it that way. Sister Mary Cross comes to mind. Mama Cox. Yeah, some people like that, you know, have given me some insight over the years. I had Sister Mary Cross tell me something one time that there ain't nobody on this planet knew. You know, just like Daniel gets the interpretation of this dream, that didn't come from here. It came from outside of here. Okay? So I think we have a hard time dealing with the supernatural sometimes. And part of the reason is, I believe, Brother Mark, would you mind getting 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12? If that's not too much trouble. And I think it's because of the flesh, a lot of it, because of what we dwell in. Brother Mark reads that, it'll kind of bring that into focus. Yes, sir.
For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known.
Right. We're looking through a glass darkly. Okay, and it says, but when we know in part, but when we meet face to face, everything will clear up for us. Well, the only time we're going to meet face to face with Christ is when we have our glorified body. Okay? So, you know, we look at things now, and sometimes it is a little dark. We can't really distinguish what we're supposed to do, or there's pretty clear guidelines in the Bible on some things, and some things I've ran into, it's a struggle between what I want and what I should do. You know, it's a fight. I had no trouble telling anybody that, and if you ain't having a fight, I need to talk to you. You know, it's so if we're having to deal with this flesh, plus dealing with assaults by the enemy, then it makes it hard for us to see some things sometimes. And as we grow with Christ, we see things a little differently. I promise I see things differently than I did 10 years ago. But on this beast and the 10 horns or the 10 toes, we'll get into this more in Daniel chapter 7. So which of these views do I think is right? I think they're both right. Because you have to understand the view that we talked about last week where the war started in Genesis chapter 3, where God declared war. I'll put enmity. You know, we have to understand that concept before we can put some of this other together. Because we're looking at things from a fleshly standpoint. But this goes a whole lot deeper than that. And I think they're both right, to a degree, the best I can understand.
The disciples, they experienced that with Jesus, you know, when he appeared to them in the upper room.
Oh, yeah, boy.
And then the thing that was when he went back to his body, they rolled the stone away for him to walk out.
Right.
So, you know, there's concept there that it's hard to...
Well, if you read that account, Brother Fred's talking about in the upper room where it said Jesus appeared unto the disciples. It didn't say he came in the door or the window. It said he appeared. That's, you know, I mean, and he was there. So those are things hard for us to conceptualize because we live in about 3.5 dimensions. Give or take, you know, we got length, breadth, and width. And we live in a little bit of time. We live in the present, right now. We don't know the future. And sometimes we can remember the past okay. But we live in the moment. So that's, we'll say 3 3/4 dimensions. Well, scientists have discovered there's at least 13 known dimensions. Okay? So it's hard for us to conceptualize all that. But I don't care if there's 100 dimensions. He's the God of them all. You know, well, that's just because we don't understand it don't mean it's not so. But we'll get into that a little bit deeper in chapter 7 of Daniel. But I'm going to go back to Daniel chapter 2. And we're going to pick up here at verse 44. And it said, "And the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms," that's the 10 it's talking about, "and shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest," now think about how many times it's referenced in the Bible as Jesus Christ as a stone or a rock. That's when you read this, that's what comes to mind. "For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands," supernatural act, "cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, The great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. The stone. The stone cut out of the mountain without hands, that's Jesus. You know, I've read arguments that it's the church and this and that and the other. No, it's Jesus. The church was never set here to conquer or break anything into pieces. And we could do a pretty decent study on that, but it's Jesus. And I just kind of done a little search last night, and I quit at 17 verses that mentions Jesus as the rock or the stone, you know. So I believe we can be pretty sure in that. But we talk about these kingdoms, you know, it's shown this image, and it starts at gold and works its way down till it's eventually iron and clay. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, which was the head, and as it went down, the Assyrians and the Greeks and all this, those kingdoms, when they conquered somebody, they wanted to assimilate the best of those societies into their societies. That's the reason Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were all brought in. They wanted to take the best of those societies to help improve their society, as long as it didn't interfere with their gods. Okay? Except for Rome. Rome crushed and broke and killed everything. They didn't have no time for you. If the Roman army came to your city and set up a siege, they were prepared to stay 32 years. That's what they were prepared. They had enough people that they could sit that army there till you starved out. They wouldn't even have to fight. They wanted you crushed. And you can tell by their punishments, by the crucifixions, they did impalements. I mean, they didn't waste any time. They were cruel taskmasters, hard on people. So, and we'll get into that too on some of the Roman Empire later on in Daniel. They were harsh people. If you were a farming community, which everybody was back then, I mean, that's how they lived. Wasn't Walmart. They sowed your seeds, your fields in salt, so nothing would grow for several years. So you had no way. You had to depend upon them to live. Okay? Hard people. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face, the king of the known world. Come on in here, sweetie. Come on up here. It's good to see you. But anyway, the king of the known world here falls upon his face and worships Daniel, which I don't think Daniel had any of that, because you can go on back in the chapter there and see that. It's good to see you. You sit wherever you want. So the king of the known world worships Daniel and commanded that an offer of oblation and sweet odors unto him. I don't know what happened unto that, because I don't think Daniel accepted it just because of verse 30 over here in Daniel chapter 2. I don't know. I can't say that. Said, the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods. See the big G and the little G's there. And a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldest reveal this secret. So he's recognizing God, the God, because Daniel was able to reveal this thing unto the king through God. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and the chief governors over all the wise men of Babylon. This is them Chaldeans we talked about that couldn't come up with this interpretation. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. And sitting in the gate of the king, we don't really understand that concept, but in most of those cities it was double walled, and these gates were huge for the most part. And they were double walled, and in there the prophets would prophesy, people would come and meet and gather, and the king passed judgment in the gate. If there was matters to be done, that's where he sat, and that's where he passed judgments. So Daniel is elevated to a place of a lot of power. But you got to remember these wise men that he was put over, the Chaldeans. You know, Daniel has saved these people's bacon because they had a death sentence. They were done until Daniel came up with this. And I thought, well, maybe he got rid of them people. No, they show up in chapter 3, plotting against Daniel. Bad times. I just don't understand how the king, I don't know how far apart chapter 2 and chapter 3 is, but we're going to start in Daniel chapter 3. I don't know how far we'll get, but we're going to start. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So somehow Nebuchadnezzar, even after this deal, in chapter 2, has got the big head, and somebody's fanned his ego, and he's going to build himself an image of himself. That was, let's see here. I got it written down. All right, the cubit. There's argument over the cubit. So what we generally accept as a cubit is 18 inches. It's the length from the tip of a man's finger to his elbow. Well, they break it down, if you study it, into a short cubit and a long cubit. A short cubit's 18 inches, a long cubit's 21 inches. And from my tip of my finger to my elbow is about 20 and a quarter or so. You know, so everybody's forearm is different. So we'll go by the 18 cubit. So this thing was solid gold, okay? And it was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Now, how it stood, I have no idea. But it was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. So while we're talking about this, we're going to talk about gold and money just a little bit. A bar of gold, like you see on TV, they use in the movies and all that, weighs 27.5 pounds, that little bar. And in today's money, currently, with the value of gold, it's worth about $800,000. Okay? If you took all the gold that has ever been mined that we know of and melted it down, it wouldn't quite fill up an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Y'all have seen the Olympics, them big old pools. They're 164 feet long, 82 feet wide, and 7 feet deep. So all the gold that's ever been mined wouldn't fill that pool up if you melted it down. That kind of surprises me. So $800,000 is one bar. 22% of all the dollars that have ever been in existence were printed last year. 22%. And I'm going somewhere with this. So I'm going to try to put trillions into perspective so that we understand this thing. We'll start with millions. Millions. 1 million seconds is 11 and a half days. 1 billion seconds is 32 years. 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. And we're spinning with reckless abandon, you know. If you stack pennies up, 1 million pennies would reach a mile. 1 billion pennies would be 870 miles. 1 trillion pennies is 870,000 miles. That'll go to the moon, from here to the moon and back. 870,000 miles. That puts trillions into perspective, what we're doing. It's crazy. If you made $45,000 a year it would take you 22 years to amass $1 million, not paying taxes. If you made $45,000 a year, it would take you 22,000 years to amass $1 billion. And they don't even give a figure for the trillions. 1 million ants. And they didn't say if it was a carpenter ant or one of them little tiny ants. They said 1 million ants weighs about 6 pounds. 1 billion ants weighs 3 tons, about the size of an African elephant. And 1 trillion ants would weigh 3,000 tons. So I'm trying to put this into perspective for you to see what's coming in history. Our gross domestic product for 2020 was 21.69 trillion. That was our gross. That's everybody working. That was what we did. 21.69 trillion. Our debt was 28 and some change trillion. So we're already in the hole. That means that every man, woman, and child in America would be responsible to pay $85,000. Every man, woman, and child. Guess who holds 78% of our debt? No, we do. We do. We're broke. We're beyond broke. 78% of the debt Americans own. 78% of the debt we own. Because it goes on and on. We'd have to do an economics class. But most of what that is owed to Social Security, pension funds, and Medicare. They've been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Okay? If we ran our house like that, we would be hungry, no power, no water. We can't, like I said, we're past broke. But money is not our hope. We scramble around and work like it is. But money is not our hope. Our hope is in Jesus Christ. But there's times coming, and it tells us in the book, that you cannot buy or sell without the mark of the beast. If you take the mark of the beast, there is no going back. That's it. There's no repentance. I'm just warning you what's coming, because we can't continue on doing what we're doing on this current path. Something has to change. I don't know what's going to change, but something has to change to where there's enough control over everybody that you cannot do anything without the mark of the beast. Now, whether we'll see it in our lifetime, I don't know. But how can we continue going forward at the rate we're going? I read an article that by 2050, our debt would be 200% of the gross national product. 200%. There's a plan out there, and you know who drives all this stuff. If you look at all this is driven by Satan. Okay? There's something drives all this. So, because the Antichrist has to come on the scene, and the world has to be in such sad shape that they're looking towards this person that has all the answers. Okay? It's coming. And it's coming rapidly, I do believe. And I just want to give you this as a perspective of pay attention. It disturbs me to see some of this and how willing people are to do certain things. A man has to think, you can imagine the old prophets. When they come out here and give a message that nobody liked, they did it because God told them to, and we may need to be telling some people some things that we don't want to tell them. Because the alternative that they have, if they go down the wrong road and choose the wrong path, there's no return. It's the end, And that really puts it in perspective for me. God will make a way. Our hope's in Jesus Christ. I always remember that. That's our hope, not the dollar, Somebody told me the other day, said, boy, you can't take it with you. I said, you got to have enough to get out. And it costs more to die than it does to live. I mean, it's crazy. But it's the way it's set up. It's stacked against us. Okay? So just remember that. And we'll stop right there and we'll pick up chapter 3 next week, Lord willing.